You're talking to a guy and he hasn't said anything wrong. Nothing's off. But something in you is slightly braced. Not scared, just not fully at ease. And you couldn't tell someone why if they asked. That thing you're doing right now, that low-level scan that runs in the background of almost every interaction with a man, there's a reason it's there. And it's not what most people tell you it is. Because you've heard the responses. Not all men. You're going to end up alone with that attitude. That sounds like a you problem. And at some point you just stopped explaining it. Not because they convinced you. Because the explaining was its own kind of exhaustion. But here's what's actually happening. Your brain isn't being irrational. It's doing what brains do after they've collected enough data. It's pattern matching. And the pattern it built didn't come from one bad experience. It came from dozens of small ones that nobody else would even call a betrayal, a tone shift, a boundary tested. The guy who was perfect for 3 months and then slowly became someone else. None of it dramatic enough to point to. All of it enough to rewire how you listen. And that rewiring costs you something most people don't see. You're in a good conversation, maybe even with someone you like, and you're not fully there. Part of you is running a background check in real time. Not on him specifically, on the category. You're screening for the version of him that hasn't shown up yet. And that takes energy. Real energy. The kind where you come home from a perfectly fine interaction and you're drained and you don't know why. Nothing happened, but you were working the entire time without realizing it. And the worst part isn't the scanning. It's what it does to the ones who might actually be safe. Because they don't get the full version of you either. They get the monitored version. The one who's present but slightly held back. And you know that. You can feel the gap between how much you like someone and how much you'll actually let them in. And that gap, it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like something your body decided for you a long time ago. So you've got a brain that's scanning before you've decided to scan, a body that braces before anything's gone wrong, and an exhaustion that doesn't match the threat level of your actual day. None of that is random, but where it started, that's where it gets more complicated. Because not everyone's version of this comes from the same place. Some of you built this from your own data. Years of small betrayals, patterns that repeated across different men, enough evidence that your brain just automated the response. You didn't decide to stop trusting. Your nervous system made the call based on the numbers, and honestly, the math checks out. The cost of missing a red flag was always higher than the cost of being slightly guarded. So your brain chose guarded. Every time. There is a name for that cost calculation. Psychologists call it betrayal trauma. And the key part is this. When the person who hurts you is someone you needed to trust, a partner, a father, someone close, your brain doesn't just file it as one bad experience. It reclassifies closeness itself as the risk factor. Not him. Closeness. But some of you didn't build this from scratch. You inherited it. You watched your mom stay quiet. You watched your aunt make excuses. You absorbed the template before you had your own data, and then your own data confirmed it. So now you can't tell where the inheritance ends and your experience begins. And some of you know exactly where it started. One event, one person. And everything after that was just your system refusing to make the same mistake twice. The difference matters, because one of these updates with new evidence, slowly, painfully, but it updates. One of these needs you to separate what you saw from what you've lived. And one of these isn't going to shift just because a good man shows up and is patient. It needs something more specific than that. But here's what none of those responses, the not all men, the you'll end up alone, ever account for. The scan kept you functional. It kept you out of situations that would have cost you more than vigilance ever did. The problem was never that you learned to read threat. The problem is that your system never got a clear signal for when it's safe to put the scanner down. And safe started looking exactly like the setup for unsafe, because it always did before. That guy you were talking to at the beginning, the one who hadn't done anything wrong, you weren't being irrational, you were being experienced. You didn't lose the ability to trust. You just got better at recognizing what happens when you trust too early. If that's been running in the background your whole life and you've never heard someone describe the actual mechanics of it, I have a video on what happens when hypervigilance becomes your default setting. I'll leave it here, and if this channel's new to you, subscribe. More like this is coming.